Okay, we're just going to make a start. There will be other members joining. Claire has said that she will be able to join us at 2 p.m. So there'll be other members who will come online as we go through this. So we're just going to make a start. Apologies for the delay for everybody that was able to get here on time. So if I could just begin by making sure that everybody can hear okay. Thumbs up there, so there's no issues with that. And also, just as a reminder to every one of us members and other participants, that if you can mute your microphone until you're speaking, just so all background noise and conversations will be heard, and particularly to the members, if they have any questions that they want to ask, just do as per normal via the WhatsApp group chat facility. So just to remind members that the committee meeting, that this particular committee meeting isn't going to be recorded nor broadcasted. So you are entitled to use your mobile devices as long as they are in airplane mode, etc., etc. So just in terms of the meeting formalities, apologies. We've had apologies obviously from the chair, Declan, who's unable to be with us, hence I'm chairing in his absence. There's no chairperson's business and there are no matters arising. So that just leads us on to the purpose of the briefing and the meeting. So it is a briefing from the Agri-food Sector on the Climate No.2 Bill. So we have a joint presentation this afternoon by a number of organisations from right across the Agri-food Sector and industry. So can I welcome you all here. We've got Mike Johnston from Dairy UK. We have Aileen, Lawson and David Brown from the Ulster Farmers Union. We have Ian Stevenson from Livestock and Meat Commission, and Conall Donnelly from the NI Meat Exporters Association, and Robin Irvine and Gill Gallagher from the Grain Trade Association as well. So you are all very welcome, and thank you for joining us so soon to talk about climate change again. The committee welcomes very much your continued engagement and support on this, and it is a great help in the scrutiny of both these bills, obviously today in relation to Bill number 2. So in terms of this session, how it worked today, I'm going to ask one representative from each organisation to provide a brief summary. So hopefully among your own organisations you have designated one person to give a brief summary of your organisation's views on the Climate Change No.2 Bill for 3-4 minutes. And we're not really starting in any particular order, alphabetical order. So Mike, that view, so that must be alphabetical order in terms of the organisations that you represent rather than your own names. So and then after we've heard from all the groups, we will open up the discussion for questions and answers from members. So Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. Can you hear me okay? I'm very grateful for the opportunity to meet with you and your colleagues today about this second climate change bill. The dairy sector's commitment to working more sustainably can be demonstrated by its improvements already achieved in the last 3 decades, during which time we've reduced the carbon intensity of a litre of milk, and we're continuing to invest throughout the supply chain to further reduce emissions, to improve our efficiency of energy usage, and to reduce our use of fossil fuels. And those that of your colleagues who have engaged in our seminars and virtual farm tours in recent years will have seen evidence of our commitment in practice on farms and in processing plants. We do recognise that our journey still has a long way to go, and it will be a journey that will not be without pain. We will have to continue to invest on farms and in processing plants and we will have to be open to changing the ways in which we produce milk. But I believe we can do this in a managed way that does not result in the transformation of our sector into little more than a cottage industry. So let me map out the drivers that will influence our journey over the next 30 years. The work that you and your colleagues are doing now in putting in place legislation will have a massive influence. You have to decide between allowing the Northern Ireland Agri-food Sector to continue to produce the high quality food that customers and consumers at home and around the world want to buy and consume, while meeting challenging but realistic environmental targets, or creating legislation that sacrifices farming and processing businesses and their jobs on the altar of achieving minuscule additional environmental benefit. But in addition to legislation, our customers are taking an active interest in climate change. This is a double-edged sword. It's good that this interest is being reflected in positive engagement with our supply chain, but what we're finding is that we're being pulled in different directions by different customers. And at the moment, this is happening in a vacuum without legislative targets to act as a benchmark. So we need our customers to work with us, but we need the leadership that only legislation can provide. And in this regard, it is not helpful that Northern Ireland has 2 climate change bills progressing through the Assembly. And I would urge you to provide the leadership we need and let us have a single bill fashioned on this number 2 bill that we can work through to have legislation that we can help to deliver. And the third factor that will impact our journey is the action of our competitors. Increasingly, environmental criteria are part of the proposition to consumers and customers to buy and consume products from particular countries and companies. We need to make sure that our environmental credentials are not only as good as our competitors, but we also need to recognize that we have an opportunity here to invest in our supply chain to create areas of environmental competitive advantage. So this is our vision of the journey we're on, but we need you to walk the journey with us by giving us a legislative framework that challenges us but doesn't decimate our sector, that opens opportunities but doesn't precipitate business closures and job losses, and that creates an environment where supply chains, government and research can work together to deliver targets and create opportunities to underpin Northern Ireland as a world leader in sustainable food production. In our view, the Climate Change Bill number 2 has the potential to provide the sort of legislative framework that will address what we need for our journey over the next 30 years. It provides targets that are very challenging, but achievable and are evidence-based, and it has the flexibility to allow us to adapt to the benefits that will flow from new knowledge, to the evolving needs of customers, and to maintain our competitiveness in relation to our competitors around the world. We are fully committed to the journey of the next 30 years, and as an indication of this commitment, I can tell you that we are working with CAFRE on a programme to start carrying out carbon audits on dairy farms early next year. In our view, this is the way forward. Industry, government and research working together. So our ask of you and your fellow MLAs is to give us a legislative framework that will facilitate this collaboration and that provides targets that are evidence-based and, even though they may be challenging, are achievable. You have the opportunity in this number 2 bill to reach out to industry, to create the conditions to foster collaboration across government, industry and research in ways that will create opportunities and establish Northern Ireland as a world leader in dealing with climate change and in meeting the demand from a growing population for high quality and safe food. And I would urge you to grasp this opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Thank you. Just we'll keep going through all the presentations. So, Ulster Farmers Union are next. Well, I'm not sure there's Aileen or David. David, go ahead.
Once again, thanks for the opportunity of giving evidence. I suppose, look, we've already presented to the committee and highlighted our support for climate change legislation. and it's vital that we get the right targets adopted. We know there is a need to reduce emissions from agriculture and increase the carbon sequestration on our farms, but that needs to be done in the context of fair and credible legislation backed up by the evidence that delivers a just transition for everyone. The Kpmg report, which we commissioned with the industry, was published in August, clearly indicating the consequences to the agri-food sector if the wrong targets are selected. The UFU has been actively promoting climate action on farms for over a decade, encouraging members to take action on their farms. And since 2008, we've been part of the DAERA-led Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership, along with other industry representatives and indeed DAERA and government. However, this group does need to be reinvigorated, plans updated. You may be aware many farms are already carrying out positive actions that will reduce emissions, with carbon audits being rolled out through business development groups and through supply chain initiatives as well from processors and companies that are all focused on this. And hopefully we're going to have the ability to roll out a soil health scheme shortly, which will have a carbon element that at the end of the day will be world leading. The UFU continues to promote measures that farmers should adopt to reduce their on-farm carbon footprint. We're currently working with UK farming unions, highlighting positive actions towards COP26, and indeed this week have been involved in the countryside COP events, which are on each day, raising awareness and highlighting actions needed on climate mitigation and carbon sequestration. We're already on this journey, and it is vital that the correct legislative framework is adopted to allow that work to continue and deliver further reductions. Unlike the PMB, the Private Members Bill, the Climate Change No.2 Bill has targets which are acceptable to the Ulster Farmers Union because they are based on the expert advice. But adopting these targets, as we've said previously, doesn't assume a lack of ambition because they are going to be extremely difficult for Northern Ireland to meet. That 82% target will mitigate considerable change across society. And the CC have outlined some of those, around 46% of agricultural land being taken out of livestock production, freed up for forestry, agroforestry, energy crops, and restoring of peatland. And it's worthy of pointing out, I mean, they talk about 150,000 hectares of peatland being re-wet. That in the main is, well, in its entirety, in fact, is LFA land. So that pressure will exist very much on those beef and sheep farms that, you know, are perhaps maybe marginal in terms of their profitability in the first place. It's important in tackling those greenhouse gas emissions that we don't lead to other environmental trade-offs, exacerbating other environmental issues, and we're opposed to any forced reduction in livestock numbers. We've previously indicated our concern around carbon leakage, basically where we offshore the food production that is needed. Again, repeating that UK at 60% self-sufficient needs that food to feed the people, and Ireland in its entirety supplies a lot of that food. And if we were to export that production to some other parts of the world, we need to keep in mind that this is a global climate. It is something that is not just a little bubble over Northern Ireland. And we need the capacity to continue to feed the consumers with the high quality food that we produce. We acknowledge, or it's recognised, that knowledge and science will evolve, and I suppose this target by the CCC could be amended. The No.2 Bill allows that flexibility and safeguards this to happen. But at the end of the day, before any changes are made, careful analysis is required and expert advice on the impact that would have, not just on agriculture, but indeed on the wider society and economy. We believe in a just transition that should be established, and it should be included in that No.2 Bill. And farmers in rural communities shouldn't end up carrying the burden of climate change. They are part of the solution, and delivering their fair share is something we're very much up for. We believe carbon budgets are useful in setting out a balanced pathway to targets outlined in this bill. 5-year cycles are sensible to allow policies to be adopted and implemented to help deliver those budgets. And independent monitoring, of course, will be important in assessing the effectiveness of those budgets and delivering against those targets. This will also allow the Northern Ireland Assembly to monitor progress and review those policies. The UK Climate Change Committee are considered throughout the world to be experts in this area, and they have been playing a vital role in carrying out and developing that pathway and reporting progress across the UK. It's fair to say, and do not underestimate the challenge that Lord Debon and his team brings to agriculture and brings to us as farmers. However, the UK Climate Change Committee must ensure that it obtains relevant advice from Northern Ireland. So we're proposing that sector-specific advisory committees are established to report and advise on specific economic, environmental, social circumstances, particular to Northern Ireland for each of the sectors. That greenhouse gas industry partnership that I mentioned earlier could effectively carry out that role for agriculture and the land use sectors. It represents a wide range of organisations from agri-food and the environmental sector alongside DERA. And it works through 4 specialist subgroups to develop that work. There's considerable research that has already taken place, and AFBI and indeed the main universities, Queen's University and others, are working, and it's essential that that programme of research is funded. It needs long-term support. It's not something that can be funded for 5 years and then we just move on, because we need to develop innovative technologies. And it's absolutely vital that in order to tackle emissions from the agriculture sector, a partnership approach is developed with government and academia working alongside the agri-food industry to deliver for both the sector and the environment, ensuring profitable and productive agriculture sector while reducing emissions, which is challenging but an essential task. And Northern Ireland agriculture needs to be appropriately equipped and empowered with the right policies and research. So that is something which we would wish to emphasise, the need that for that research to be well funded and to play a key role in climate change. And just finally, I suppose to say that, look, our fellow farmers across the border are out on the streets protesting about what they're concerned about being imposed on them. And I do believe that that can be avoided here if we get a sensible evidence-based approach. And this morning, the Minister and his officials stated they were open to compromise, and we would urge the politicians to get around the table and work on this. We do need good climate change legislation. We need sensible targets that don't decimate farming and the rural communities. And we need our politicians to work together to deliver this. Really, in conclusion, get the targets right from the start. Thank you.
Thanks very much, David. Thank you. Ian, you're up next.
Okay, thanks, Philip. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. I guess, I suppose initially I would like to thank the committee for the opportunity to attend today, this joint session with industry, which I think is, I suppose, emphasises the importance of this issue to the whole agri-food industry. LMC, from our perspective, we work within the Northern Ireland beef and lamb industry to support the marketing and development of the livestock and livestock products from our region. If you look at where we're at the minute, taking all on other industry challenges aside at the moment, of which there are no shortage of them, it's climate change and sustainability agenda, which is really at the centre of industry conversation and action on the ground. As an industry, it's worth emphasising we're not just out of the starting blocks when it comes to the journey to UK net zero. We have done some excellent work under the guise of the Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership for the last 11 years to reduce the carbon intensity of farm outputs, and we will continue to do so, as David rightly mentioned. The success of this Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership initiative really in raising awareness of climate change at farm level, driving more efficient and sustainable practices, and really joining up supply chain thinking certainly has been predicated on bringing everyone on the chain on a journey of continuous improvement. And I guess, for the sake of the next generations of young people who want to come into our industry and shape its future direction and prosperity, it's absolutely critical that the committee takes the necessary time and evidence on board to get the decisions right on any climate change legislation for Northern Ireland. Looking at the No.2 Bill, certainly we're pleased as LMC that the bill has made it through the Assembly to the committee scrutiny stage. In our view, it's a well-crafted bill. The approach set out for Northern Ireland to contribute to an overall UK-wide initiative to deliver net zero by 2050, certainly in our view, is the correct approach. And certainly as a level of ambition for Northern Ireland that is high for our region and certainly shouldn't be undervalued. This approach recognises Northern Ireland's important role in the domestic food supply of the UK, and the committee will no doubt be aware of that our food industry here, the output delivers enough high quality calories to feed at least 10 million people. The targets that have been set out in this bill for reductions in the emissions account for Northern Ireland in years 2030, 40 and 50 are very challenging, but they are informed by the expertise of the UK Committee on Climate Change and on sound principles of science, economics and deliverability. Delivery, certainly, of the targets in this bill will still be a monumental challenge. When you look at the first sort of target period in 2030, it's only 9 years away. And certainly our industry, whilst it's willing to play its part, will need major investment in technology. We'll need to look at how we use the land to generate output and sustain livestock numbers. And we'll also look how do we help to offset carbon emissions and sequestering greater amounts of carbon in the years ahead. Government and other actors must work in partnership with our industry to provide whatever support and investment is needed on this journey. And we certainly can't allow a situation to develop where targets are achieved through the offshoring of our domestic food production base to less carbon efficient producers overseas. At this stage, without getting into too many of the specific clauses of the bill in this short opening introduction, I will say that the flexibility that has been built into this bill to enable the amendments of targets and approach over the period to UK net zero certainly is to be welcomed and allows for new science and advice which may develop to be taken on board in the years ahead. And I suppose finally, just from our perspective, I close by saying it's vital that government works closely and in partnership with industry on this. The first carbon budget period that's envisaged in this bill is due to commence less than 15 months from now, and it's imperative that careful thought is given to the process for developing and consulting on these carbon budgets, so that all relevant sectors are given adequate time and support to adapt their practices and make any necessary investments to stay within the budgeted emissions within those targets. So that, I suppose, gives a sort of a very short introduction just from the perspective of LMC and the beef and lamb industry. Chairman.
Thanks very much, Ian. Thank you very much. Conall, you're up next.
Thanks to yourself and the committee members for having us back again. And again, like the others, I'm grateful for the opportunity to explain our position. You mightn't be surprised that some of the points I've been making aren't much different to what others have said. I have to say, though, I think Mike struck a really good tone with his comments. I think, that's the positive way that I think everybody would want to approach this. I don't want to repeat the detail I gave you back in June, but look, it is important to set the context. Grass-based farming is the primary agricultural enterprise in Northern Ireland, and that's really down to reasons of geography and climate, which renders our geography here more suitable for beef, dairy and sheep farming than for other agricultural enterprises. And we've talked about the contribution we make to the rural economy. It's 50% of agri-food industry turnover that comes from the ruminant livestock sector. That's 2.7 billion per annum. And when you consider that it does support 113,000 local jobs as a whole in the food sector, then, when you take 50% of that then that comes from the ruminant sector, the importance of that sector to farming, processing, veterinary, haulage, warehouses, government is immense. And, I think the key point in all of this is that our ruminant livestock convert inedible grass to high quality protein, and that's to feed 10 million consumers every year in the UK with beef and 2 million with lamb. And it's a global issue, and with the global population expected to exceed 10 billion by 2050, global meat demand is expected to increase by 76% since 2005 by that stage, and that production is going to be essential from a food security perspective. And with our carbon footprint in Northern Ireland, 250% lower than the global average, it's essential then that our productive capacity is maintained, not just from an economic perspective, but from a global climate agenda, because we don't want to create a vacuum that'll be filled by less climate-friendly beef with a higher carbon footprint. We would be quite positive about the objectives of this bill. We support climate legislation. I think, as we said before, we need to reduce the emissions. We're already on that pathway, and at this stage, the certainty around legislation, I think, is critical, because we're all, as Mike says, looking at targets in the commercial realm as well. And we support the fact that the emissions reduction targets in this executive bill are in line with the CCC targets of 82%. We understand the importance of stretching targets that will challenge industry and society to make the kind of innovations and drive the kind of change required, behavioural and technological. And the targets in that bill are really challenging, but they are grounded in evidence. They're certainly not lacking in ambition. And the proposed targets also appear fair to us from the perspective of the alternative approach of every UK region setting a net zero target, which is the other way you could do this. And the critical thing to remember about that UK CCC approach is that it's proposing a UK carbon budgeting that allocates responsibility for the different devolved regions in a way that each UK region's taken its fair share of the pain. And I think that's a responsible approach. As an industry, we're certainly up for change. We're on the road with this. I mean, you've seen our agricultural policy proposals to government, which have set targets and ambitions around emissions reductions. Now, our three largest members in NINEA have made science-based targets undertakings with targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from direct sources on site, from energy, and on raw materials from the supply chain, including beef and sheep production. This Science-Based Targets Institute that they've signed up to is a partnership between the United Nations Global Compact, World Resources Institute, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature. And that's a global benchmark, and it's verified independently. There are 340 UK companies who have made commitments under this. Only 136 have set targets which have been signed off and approved. And that means that those businesses are locked in to the global climate agenda and to the Paris Accord. And it's notable that only a handful of Northern Ireland businesses have committed to such targets, and 3 of them are operating in our sector. Our supply chains are fragmented, and it's difficult to affect change. So the core of our approach is to get win-wins on farm, and that's about improving efficiency and reducing emissions at the same time. So this march of better genetics, better grassland management, use of feed additives, and improved livestock management, and ultimately slaughtering cattle younger is something that there's a lot of working on in that area, and a lot of initiatives through our members. We believe through a combination of those measures and the emergence of new scientific approaches, we can meet the targets in this bill without any of the draconian measures that some people have talked about, such as livestock reductions. But progress in a sector like ours will depend on the application of new and emerging science. And agriculture probably has a greater challenge than many other sectors, because it's not like a factory where you can change a specification to manufacture a machine. We're dealing with natural biological processes, and we're dealing with a large fragmented industry, and we will rely on the adaptation and application of new science. And any interim target set for agriculture must take account of those challenges. And farmers, as the UFU have said, the farmers and industry need support to make those changes. We would also welcome the flexibility in the bill to change targets where there is scientific evidence to support changes. I think this is a humble approach. It recognises that the science is evolving, and targets and policy that seem okay today might need a change in the future. And in our previous evidence session, we had a long discussion about GWP star methodology that recognises the differences between short-lived and long-lived gases. Not go into it again, that's more for the scientists, but it's clear that the science isn't standing still, and that the policy and carbon accounting methods need to keep pace with the science. And there's also the question of accounting for the sequestration on farms from hedgerows, trees, grassland. That's critical, and we believe that farmers should be measured on their net emissions as opposed to the gross emissions, and I think that's an important consideration for this bill as well. And just to summarise, we are part of the solution. Our members are actively working on this agenda. The willingness is there, and with the right legislation in place, our members and the suppliers can reduce emissions and continue to feed the growing global population. We need to do both.
Thank you very much, Conall. Thank you. between Robin and Gill. I'm not sure who's going to make the contribution, but tear away.
It's myself. Thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the invitation to appear before you today to provide evidence on the second Climate Change Bill. I suppose I would like to start by, first of all, offering our condolences to the Chair of the Committee, Declan McAleer, on his sad bereavement. Just to introduce myself, my name is Gill Gallagher, and I have recently been appointed as the Chief Executive of Nicta, the Northern Ireland Grain Trade Association. We represent the businesses that support our local farmers. There are around 60 feed manufacturing businesses and over 200 merchants across the province who are an essential part of the fabric of rural communities, creating employment and delivering crucial services. Climate change is one of the biggest and most complex challenges facing us all globally. And in Nicta, we are very supportive of the need for climate change legislation in Northern Ireland, and we're committed to helping reduce emissions in the agriculture sector. We recognise the challenge, and we are already part of the solution, applying local research and best available science to reduce the phosphate and nitrogen emissions of feeds. We've also been very proactive in developing a training programme for Northern Ireland's feed advisors, which equips them to guide farmers as to best practice in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and nutrient losses on farm. And that module was widely consulted on and welcomed by all stakeholders. It is also co-delivered by Nicta and the College of Agriculture, Food and Rural Enterprise, CAFRE. And our key message really is quite simple. A more efficient farm is a more profitable farm with a lower carbon footprint. The principle of precision nutrition very much underpins feed efficiency, and this involves ensuring that the nutrient requirements of the animal at each life stage are understood and properly met very precisely so as to minimise emissions. Improvements in feed conversion have led to less feed being consumed overall, thus lowering the carbon footprint of livestock production, and this will very much continue to be a key focus of our industry. To date, 116 ruminant feed advisors have been trained, and content for a similar module for pig and poultry advisors has been developed and is due to be rolled out in the coming months. It's estimated that our registered feed advisor members provide advice to around 40% of all farm businesses in Northern Ireland, and that covers all poultry, most of pig, most of dairy, and the major beef operations. Nicta is also a member of the Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership, the voluntary partnership between the local agri-food industry, science, government and environmental organisations. And we would reiterate what others have said before us, that we would very much welcome a reinvigoration of the partnership so that this excellent collaboration can continue to deliver results for the Northern Ireland agri-food industry and indeed for wider society. Nicta is very supportive of the second Climate Change Bill, and we certainly would welcome it. As others have said, we would also welcome the amalgamation of both bills, but into this and to proceed with the second Climate Change Bill. We are very pleased that there was a proper public consultation prior to the bill being brought forward, which we also responded to. And we acknowledge that in the accompanying explanatory and financial memorandum, it provided for impact assessments of the bill insofar as was practical to do so. What is absolutely critical is the fact that the bill is evidence-based, it's grounded in science, and it also takes account of Northern Ireland's very unique circumstances by following the advice of the renowned climate change experts, the Committee on Climate Change. Like others, we accept that the details, the targets detailed in the bill are evidence-based, but we also realise that reaching that 82% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 will still pose a very significant challenge for the agri-food sector, and the scale of that challenge should not be underestimated. It is important to emphasise again that the agri-food sector wants to be part of the solution and is playing its part in the fight against climate change. You've heard of various initiatives this afternoon that are ongoing, but it should also be understood that mitigations on farm often involve significant investment and changes to management practices, which not only can take time to implement, but also time to deliver impact. and we do not have all the answers yet. So we really do need investment in research and effective collaboration between industry, government and academia in order to identify and develop the most cost-effective technologies and strategies, as well as communicating directly with farmers. Meanwhile, meeting the transformation in land use that has been suggested by the Committee on Climate Change in terms of freeing up agricultural land for other uses, following reductions in UK meat and dairy consumption, could have far-reaching consequences for the agriculture sector and be difficult to achieve. There's also potential for this type of policy to lead to unintended consequences for human health, as animal source foods contribute a large proportion of the key nutrients in the diets of children, adolescents and adults. Furthermore, if consumption patterns do not change as anticipated, this demand will still need to be fulfilled, and it is important that it continues to be fulfilled from a low carbon production base in Northern Ireland compared to more carbon intense imports. As others have said, this would simply lead to carbon leakage and end up defeating global climate change objectives. Any policy which leads to the forced reduction in livestock numbers or output from the agriculture sector cannot be supported. And given the global challenge of an increasing population, the question really does have to be asked: should Northern Ireland, with an efficient and low emission agriculture sector, be forced to reduce food production? A Northern Ireland centric policy which forces our farmers out of business will actually defeat global climate objectives. It's also important to note that the consequence of reducing livestock numbers is not simply a reduction in the national herd. It will have far-reaching consequences throughout the agri-food sector, which employs 113,000 people, with knock-on effects on subsidiary businesses such as agri-supply merchants, meat processors, veterinary services, and risk the viability of rural communities, as well as creating additional social and economic pressures for wider society. Therefore, the principle of a just transition must be enshrined in this second bill as a safeguard to guarantee that the benefits of the green economy transition are shared widely. And in this respect, the Scottish model of a just transition should be considered in Northern Ireland. While the bill provides the broad framework, the delivery and success of the bill will very much depend on secondary legislation. It's therefore imperative that any secondary legislation and policies undergo thorough regulatory, economic and rural needs impact assessments and also guarantee that just transition. Policies must facilitate innovation and avoid stifling business opportunities for reducing carbon. Collaboration with industry will also be key for delivering outcomes, and commitment to long-term funding for research into climate mitigation and adaptation solutions is very much needed. Finally, our industry is underpinned by science, and our members have a proven track record of delivering environmental solutions and disseminating key messages on farm. As we have said, we are all in the industry very much committed to playing our part in the fight against climate change, and we welcome the opportunity to be involved in these discussions on the forthcoming climate change legislation for Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we're just going to open up to members to ask questions. So can I just ask everybody, just again to remind you that if you're not speaking or asking a question, put yourself on mute, and then when you're finished asking a question, put yourself on mute. And also just to the members and the contributors, you know, there's I think 6 organisations here. And then there's a number of members. So if you're asking a question, if you can specify if it is for a particular individual or specific organisation, can you identify that, and that we're not sort of all repeating ourselves on the same subject. So I'm just going to throw open. Rosemary, you'd indicated you'd want to ask a question.
Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the contributors. Interesting to hear your thoughts on Climate Bill 2. Now, you've all spoken about Climate Bill 2 and you've all been fairly supportive of Climate Bill 2. I want to refer back to Climate Bill 1 in a minor sort of way, but I'm wondering, do you see a future where the two climate bills, Climate Bill 1, as you know, Climate Bill 1 and 2, are progressing together, are progressing through. Do you see a future where perhaps Climate Bill 1 and 2 could be submerged into one Climate Bill? Start with Ulster Farmers Union.
Aileen, do you want to go ahead? I've said my piece at the start.
Hi there, Rosemary. Yeah, it's absolutely vital that the two bills, I think, they need to come together and there to be a compromise found. I mean, if we want to get climate change legislation, which I think all of the organisations around here have indicated they are supportive of legislation, if we want to get that through in this mandate, I think it's important that we find a compromise that works for everybody. We've made it very clear that the private members bill, the number 1 bill, would decimate the agri-food sector. But the main reason for that is the targets. So if we could work with the targets within the number 2 bill, there are other issues within both bills that could perhaps, in our view, be merged or compromise found. So I think from UFE point of view, we really would urge the MLAs to get around the table and start trying to find where those compromises would be and where they would work. And the sooner the better, so as we all actually get on with the job of delivering for climate change and getting the policies out on the ground to allow, action to be taken and the research to be done and so forth. So I think our message to you is, please find those compromises and do so quickly.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just to jump in there, support entirely what Aileen has said, Rosemary. I think it's crazy that we have got 2 bills now trying to do the same thing, going through the Assembly and this committee at the same time. And the sooner that we can get a single bill that we can start to work around and work through and work with, the better, because as I said in my opening comments, we're being pulled in all directions by customers. Our competitors are gathering momentum in the sort of activities that they're undertaking. We want to get on. We want to start and make things happen in a new and different way. But we need this because, everybody says we've got to have a strategy. Well, the nature of a strategy is you've got to know where you're starting from and you've got to know where you're wanting to get to. And at the minute, we don't know where we're wanting to get to. We need to know that. So absolutely support what Aileen's saying there. We need a single bill that is evidence-based, and it's up to you, the MLAs, to take on board the comments that you're hearing, the concerns that we have, the opportunities that we see, and give us one bill that we can then start to work with you on to try and deliver what it is that we all want, and that is to make sure that Northern Ireland plays its fair and reasonable part in getting the UK towards net zero by 2050.
Thank you. And just one other question I want to ask. The UK, the CCC, will be the sole source of expert advice in the DAERA bill in relation to climate change policy and provision of an independent oversight. Do you think that this will be an effective enough framework for accountability and scrutiny of performance within the bill? Maybe someone else, Gill?
Thank you, Rosemary. I think it's important that the Committee on Climate Change are very much an important source of expert advice for the bill. They are the renowned climate change experts, but I think it would also be worthwhile having some kind of a mechanism to be able to feed in a Northern Ireland perspective into that advice. And I think that there's quite a useful mechanism already exists with the likes of the Food Standards Agency, where there is a Northern Ireland committee set up that is able to feed in to the FSA. And perhaps if there was some kind of similar mechanism on a climate basis, that would just enable expert opinion from a Northern Ireland perspective to be fed in. I also think from an agricultural perspective, there is the Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership there. It has a collective of industry, government academia and environmental organisations already working together. And I think that could be a very useful vehicle for also feeding in specific advice on the agri side. So I think there's opportunities maybe to involve additional advice, but certainly we would be very supportive of the Committee on Climate Change opinion.
Thank you. And just a final question to Conall. Conall, do you think there's any additional need for independent oversight in relation to the climate change bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I probably concur with what Gill has said, that the CCC is, there's a responsibility already for the authorities to report to the CCC. They have obligations already with respect to that. So I think it's providing the kind of the local flavour for that, if that's required. Again, I think there's been discussions obviously in about the concept of a climate change commissioner, and I think one of the big considerations there has to be the cost. Obviously, be a cost to the taxpayer, and the benefit that provides over and above what the CCC can provide in terms of oversight. So I think I suspect that's kind of what you're getting at, Rosemary.
Yeah.
And where's the value for money? And I mean, really that's the question. I mean, what is that going to cost over and above the service that gets provided by the CCC, and which has already been paid for by, as I understand it, by the department. So that's the key question, and I think it's I think the CCC are they have the powers as it stands. They have the powers of oversight as it stands. So I think it would be limited value, but maybe others want to chip in on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. Patrick, you're next.
I don't think I'm online now. Yeah. Sorry. First of all, my apologies. I have another meeting that's due to start at 2:15, but I wanted to make sure that I asked you a number of questions. We've been hearing quite a bit, even during evidence, about sustainable measures, and we heard today about a balanced approach from the department and working in partnership. And now, I'm glad I'm hearing things starting to evolve to the stage of practical measures like yourself, Gill. I want to challenge the perception that nothing can be done until legislation is in place. Now, I'm sure each of you, individually or collectively, are doing things that will probably form part of the links that are required to help mitigate and help prevent the climate change that's so perceptible to us. It'll be helpful for me, and I'm sure other members of the committee, to hear just what measures you're already engaged in. Like this morning, we heard about the issues on farm, the problems on farm, and the big issues that are going to be dealt with or have to be dealt with at farm level. But there's nothing to prevent businesses. Conall, I heard you talking about some of the businesses. Sorry, mobile going too in the middle of it. Somebody else look at me. Sorry about that. I heard you mention about, I think it was 106 businesses had already moved on and were taking measures on the likes of that. So I would like to hear what those are, just so that the impression doesn't go abroad that people are sitting static here and not looking ahead, because clearly for businesses it's good and it's a marketable thing for their businesses to be seen to be doing that, because there's clearly a market there for that and people are buying into the environmental arguments, rightly so, and they want to see just how responsible the commercial aspects of life are, such as yourselves.
Look, Patsy, I'm glad you asked the question, because it isn't a case of waiting for the legislation. There's no question anybody operating in the commercial world at the minute, this is a huge driver from customers, domestically in particular, but also internationally. And and has been over the last 10 years, and increasingly so. And there is obviously in our sector there's a particular focus, so there has been a particular focus on red meat in the sort of the broader market. And commercially, there's been an onus on us in the sector to address the emissions as part of our corporate and social responsibility, and that is happening. The most difficult place to address those challenges are on farm, because as I said during my presentation, it's a very fragmented industry. It's you're talking about biological processes. As I say, it's not just like changing a specification in terms of the manufacturer of a machine or changing an energy supplier. This is a much more complex thing to change. There's no silver bullet. Lots of small measures that are required to make the kind of progress that we need, and we're going to need scientific advances down the line as well to meet our targets, and those are coming, and there's a lot of investment coming into that area. But however, that's not to say that there hasn't been progress. And when you look at the work that was done, everybody's talked, probably apart from myself, about the Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership. That was a fantastic model over the last 10 years. And if you look at actually what's going on there, we have carbon footprinting going on farms. We have, 3,200 farmers participating in the business development groups. And there's a number of those business development groups is a detailed and dedicated focus on resource use and sustainability. There's 12,000 farmers trained under the Farm Family Key Skills Programme, including soil analysis, animal health and business planning. 29 new technical demonstration farms set up in the cattle and sheep sectors with a target reaching 40 such farms. There's the Arc Zero project, but if you had to be worth actually getting John Gilliland here to talk about that, it's involving Deer Agri-Research and QUB, and that's brought farms together to investigate practical ways to measure, manage and reduce carbon emissions. You've all sorts of research going on in terms of reductions in terms of nitrous oxide and carbon sequestration in grassland, and you've all of the work that CAFRE are doing around farm efficiencies and through Farm Family Key Skills. So there's all that on farms, but actually probably the easier wins for processors in our sector are in the factory in terms of how we source our energy, how we deal with our packaging, and improving kind of our carbon footprint from this processing site itself. And they're extremely active on that front, buying energy efficient technologies, investment in AD. There's so many programs ongoing in terms of regenerative technologies, and I think in the previous evidence I provided, Patsy had provided evidence on that. Even if you take something like bovine viral diarrhea and the progress that's been made there, made a huge contribution towards carbon emissions reductions. I think the CL report showed that if you reduce bovine viral diarrhea, you can reduce the carbon footprint of an animal by 130%. So huge amount of work going on in that space. We're very much on this. I think actually we're probably more so than a lot of other sectors, yet perhaps it's ourselves that are taking the brunt of the focus in many respects, and we're not complaining about that. We're getting on with it. But I think there needs to be a focus on other sectors as well.
Yeah.
I might just add one short point to that as well, just from a beef and sheep meat perspective. It's not just about what we're doing now as well. The industry actually has focused quite a bit on what more can we do and how can government incentivise us to do it. So looking at future agricultural policy, for example, can we incentivise animals to get to slaughter at an earlier age? Can we get more cows calving down at 24 months of age, reducing the calving interval, get more use of low-emission slurry spreading equipment on the ground? All of these things that really help to drive efficiency and productivity and cut greenhouse gases, which really was the theme of that whole work of the Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership. It was built on a strategy of efficient farming cuts greenhouse gases. So I think the industry has been very active, but it certainly it's being brought on a journey, and I suppose that's what we're all trying to say today. Help us on that journey. Don't actually pull the feet from out under the industry by setting unrealistic targets that just cannot be achieved. So, that's sort of the partnership approach, I think, that everybody's sort of saying, help us on this journey.
If I could just on that, and a very palpable and very realisable one, and also a very one that you can spot very quickly, the slurry. I think there really needs to be a lot more effort going on. I don't know whether the science has quite reached, how should we call it, some of the practitioners on the ground, but it's frequently an issue that comes up with me. It's on the back of, we'll say, non-farming people who say this smell, but then on the back of that, they've clearly done their research. That smell is the problems associated with climate change and the likes. So it seems there's quite a bit of work needs to be done on that front, without a shadow of doubt.
Patsy, if you were to go around the country these days, you'll often see now slurry being piped into the field rather than being spread with a splash plate. So again, that's actually extremely common now, and there's that's been one of the key mitigation measures promoted by the Greenhouse Gas Implementation Partnership. Government policy can happen all of this stuff as well. We would see as an industry that there's more can be done as well with respect to trying to reduce the amount of fragmentation in the industry around, with so many different schemes, so many different programs, and trying to put all that together. And we have a focus on that as well. But change won't happen overnight. But I think the key message is we're very much on this.
Well, Conall, I live in the country. And I live on family farm, and I think maybe of all the slurry tanks that I've seen out over this last number of weeks, I think I've only seen one of that brand that you're talking about, and we'll maybe just leave it there. Maybe we're just not that far advanced or scientifically up there as maybe parts of the other parts of South Tyrone might be, but there, that's the way it is. You would know that better than me. So, if anyone else has anything to add, but sorry, I'm going to have to dart to another Zoom meeting that I'm way behind. I can give another couple of minutes here, just if anyone else wanted to contribute something further.
I think, Patsy, maybe if I can just jump in. I think that it's a fair point on the slurry, but I think as far as I know, splash plates now will come to an end next year, or is it next year, 2023? That they will come to an end. So, I mean, this is where legislation is helping us. But I think that, when you look at what can be achieved in that upper band water quality project, where there was quite a bit of work that was done with individual farmers. They were encouraged to soil test. They were then given advice on how and when to spread fertilizer. And the water quality has improved enormously. So that's what can be achieved if we have got the research, if we've got the government, and we've got the farmers working together. The willingness there would be different if you were having to, pull people along screaming. But if it's not the case, people are wanting to get out and do their bit. And it's just a case of giving us the right environment now where we can work together. And the evidence is there. It works.
And it's the incentive for them is a green, good product for the consumer. That's where the incentive is, the commercial incentive.
And I think that what the learning and talking to some of the farmers who have been involved in that particular project, they've actually found that their profitability has increased.
Exactly.
Using that resource that they have, the slurry, in a much more efficient way. They've been able to reduce the amount of artificial fertilizer they're having to buy in and use. And the environment is benefiting. So, I mean, everybody's a winner here. And I think that's the big motivation for farmers in particular, that it's improving efficiencies that actually do deliver the benefits for the environment.
Yep. And I think the efficiency message is obviously absolutely crucial in that respect. But, in order to take us a bit further, there will also be mitigations that will have a cost associated with them. And where that happens, I suppose the question is who bears that cost or who can support that. But again, it comes back to the point that has been made, and that's around making sure that the targets that we set are sensible. Yes, they have to be ambitious, but they also have to be achievable. And policy needs to support that in terms of there does need to be investment, be that in research or be that in new technology uptake, then, we do need policy there to incentivize it. To date, the market very much has been driving all this, which is great, and that's very important. And I mean, you've heard today, every single one of us that have spoken have outlined different initiatives that are ongoing in all the different parts of the agri-food sector. So we are being proactive. But as we've said, we do welcome the second bill. It sets a very stretching target, which we cannot be under any illusion will be a big challenge. But it's based on sound scientific advice, and we're up for the challenge in trying to meet it.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. And again, my apologies, but I have to nip them. I'm way behind for this other one. But thank you for your very valuable contributions there, all of you, and for your hard work on behalf of the sectors. Thank you.
Thanks, Patsy. Harry, you're next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you all hear me okay? Good. I was going to direct my question at Mr. David Brown, but David said he'd done enough today, so we'll maybe just go Aileen.
Did I just do that, Harry?
You were going to send me there anyway, so I thought I would just go first. I just wondered, Aileen, I would like LMC or some of the other sectors maybe to answer this as well. What do you see as the main challenges for the agri-food sector associated with at least 82% reduction by 2050? Thank you.
Sounds like I'm second best, Harry, there. So, no, I think what a lot of us have outlined so far is the measures that are being taken and are being taken up on farm across Northern Ireland. But we do know from a UK report that that'll probably only get us to about 20% of reduction in emissions by 2030 in the agri sector. Similar figures have been quoted in the south of Ireland as well by Chugas, their advisory body, that there's sort of the low hanging fruit that you can do now, but once you get after that, then things begin to get tougher. The Climate Change Committee have clearly set out that to get beyond what technologies we have at present, then there's you're looking at a change in land use potentially. Now that's something that will be very difficult for the industry to get their heads around, but we are looking at forestry, energy crops, re-wetting peatlands and things like that. So it is potentially a change in land use, but I think we need to find a way that we can do that as well as maintaining our food production in Northern Ireland. And then the other thing is really that's with what we know today. The important thing is we look at what science is coming down the line. So there's a considerable amount of investment across the world, particularly looking around methane and how you can address methane that's coming from ruminants through diets and whatever. So there's a huge need for that research to be given the space and the time to develop that wouldn't require that drastic and forced reduction in livestock that some of the evidence would be sort of at this stage pointing towards. So I think we're hopeful that science will evolve, but it needs that long-term commitment. It needs governments to commit to it, and it needs the time to get developed and to be brought to sort of commercial reality. So I suppose that's where we see things going.
Yep. Thank you, and thank you very much. And maybe Ian, you could give me something from LMC about your main challenges. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. I suppose when you talk to farmers, and David and Aileen will be doing that on a fairly regular basis, certainly one of the key challenges, I guess, that's always put back on, I suppose, policymakers is to get proper recognition for issues like carbon sequestration, for example, in terms of what farmers are doing in terms of locking up carbon in the soil. And I guess this is another area, I suppose, where the science is still catching up in terms of the approach to this. But we know certainly through trials at Hillsborough, after 50 years, soils are still sequestering carbon. There was always there was certainly some conventional wisdom in this whole debate that soils somehow got to the point where they were saturated in carbon. That doesn't appear to be the case, so it's how we can maybe incentivize those types of practices going forward that that doesn't lead to the reduction in livestock numbers, because that's probably one of the biggest challenges I suppose we all fear, from certainly from the private members bill that was talked about earlier. That was one of the big sort of, I suppose, economic impacts of that. You couldn't achieve that target unless you decimated the livestock populations, and nobody, certainly in our industry, wants to see that. So it's how you achieve these targets and get proper recognition at farm level for the positive actions they're doing to grow more efficient livestock, but also to capture more carbon in the soil, and how those processes can be incentivised. But it is a long, hard road to the 82% reduction, certainly when you're dealing with biological processes and methane. Livestock are biological systems. So, unless there are feed ingredients or something like that comes along in the future, or change genetics, or some of these things but with the knowledge that's there at the moment and the science that's there at the moment, there's still a significant challenge in that space going forward.
Mm-hmm. And would you agree with me that we don't want to do anything that would affect the quality? Because the quality of our food here is second to none. I mean, it's world renowned, and we really don't want to do anything to affect that, in which case it would affect people's health as well. So would you agree with me? We need to be careful that way as well.
If you're happy enough, Harry, I will come in on that one, because to be honest, it is something particularly around the trade deals that are currently being discussed and talked about, and indeed I was on another speaking on another meeting this morning where all of that to do with the standards, and ultimately At the end of the day, what it comes down to is we have world leading standards, not only just in the quality of the product, but also in the level of emissions that we have, like in that less than half in terms of beef, and indeed Western Europe and indeed Ireland, among the lowest in the world in terms of emissions. So to basically export, and I said this perhaps maybe at the start, which you may have missed, but I mean, if we export that food production, we do exactly what you're concerned about. We reduce not only the standards, but from a climate perspective, we're going in exactly the opposite direction to where we should be. We should be producing food in the regions of the world that have those low emissions.
Harry, can I maybe just jump in there? Because I think the other aspect of the issue that you're raising there is around food poverty. And I think the evidence would suggest that if we start to facilitate carbon leakage, that one of the unintended consequences of that would be, in fact, to increase the levels of food poverty in Northern Ireland, simply because the imported product would be much more expensive compared to the locally produced product. But coming back to your previous question around the sort of challenges, I think one of the greatest challenges that we will be facing is around data collection and data use, because it's the old adage, if you don't measure, you can't manage. And I think we're in a position now to be able to really grasp this issue of data collection, data management in a way that will give us a major competitive advantage in Northern Ireland that I'm not aware of anybody else in the world having, where we should be able to invest in knowledge gathering, a knowledge hub that brings together the various disparate sources of knowledge and data that we have into one place that we can then leverage and use for the benefit of agri-food, and indeed for policy development, policy review, etc. So that whole issue of data gathering, data analysis, big challenge, especially for I suppose for farmers in terms of being able to manage the data. But if we can get this right, there's massive opportunities for us.
Hello, Harry.
Hello,
are you?
But I got the most of it, yes. So thank you all very much. Excellent answers. Appreciate it. And thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just wasn't sure. My internet's poor up in this room, so I wasn't sure if you were cutting out. So there's no other members have indicated. So, I'm keen to expand on this carbon leakage. I know, it's not primarily the focus of any of the bills or what we're doing, but I think it's a useful conversation because, Mike, you said a couple of times there about being pulled in different directions by customers. So, is there anything that, another thing is I remember reading, I think it was prior to the summer, where a number of the larger supermarkets across the water had written to the Brazilian government in terms of the fact that they wouldn't be sourcing their products if they continue to decimate the forest and or continue to ignore climate change. That's an example of, even without legislation, businesses, i.e. supermarkets, are kind of responding to consumer demands. Do you think, is there anything that we can do here in the Assembly to legislate or put in place in any of the two bills or anywhere else that would negate carbon leakage? Or is it something that's related to trade that's beyond our remit?
I picked that up, maybe, Mike, and I suppose this was something we discussed the last day that I was up in June, and it's a big concern of ours. You mentioned Brazil, and people talk a lot about Brazil when it comes to emissions and deforestation and all of that. Australia's a really interesting example because what we've seen is a trade deal done between the UK and Australia, where effectively you would have expected, based on kind of commitments that were made around equivalent standards and things like that, for a requirement from Australia to sign up to a net zero target in the same way as the UK as a whole has. And that was missing from that, and there's no commitment there on the Australian side. And yet we have a deal whereby the UK has access to Australia has access to the UK market for 170,000 tonnes of beef. Nobody would even think of talking about Australia in this context, really. It'd really be about Brazil. And that's the equivalent of 700,000 slaughtered cattle. And it's huge. We only slaughter 450,000 cattle in Northern Ireland. In the scheme of things, it's huge. In terms of lamb, Australia has been given access of 125,000 tonnes of lamb and mutton, and that's the equivalent of 8 million sheep. Now, in Northern Ireland, we slaughter about 400,000 sheep. So what's that? 20 times the difference into the UK market. And that's the risk around this. We're actually starting from a better position because if you look at, if you look at the difference between Western Europe and emissions and Oceania emissions, and you take Australia and kind of has been represented by Oceania and Northern Ireland been represented by Western Europe. Oceania is 154% of our emissions on beef and 110% on sheep. So we're starting from a better position. And we have in the UK as a whole, there's a net zero bill, and we have very stretching targets here in Northern Ireland, yet there's no equivalent legislation target in Australia. And the real risk here is that we end up kind of offshoring production to Australia. And then you get into the question of what can we do about it, and what's our influence over UK trade policy. And it's, from the perspective of something like that, it's very, very limited. So what power does the Assembly have to legislate for carbon leakage? None, really. And even at a Northern Ireland perspective, none, because it's a reserved competency. So I really struggle with that one, to see what could be done, to influence the UK government on that.
Can I just add there that I agree with Conall and all he said, and it is trade policy which we have no influence over. But from an EU perspective, the EU are looking at the carbon border adjustment mechanism purely to protect the EU market from this issue of carbon leakage. Now it's starting in certain sectors and is expected to be widened out to cover most sort of trade policy, but that is something that the EU are obviously very concerned about, the issue around carbon leakage as they bring in stringent targets to most member states. So there is mechanisms, I suppose, being discussed, but not at a UK level. How that EU policy impacts us here, I think is unclear at this point in time. Through the protocol or whatever, so I don't think it's still in its infancy at an EU level. So it's hard to know how it'll work out. But certainly they are considering that.
But the one issue there is that 80% of our product goes into the UK, so it doesn't fall under that. So we have. If the UK had a carbon border adjustment model, you'd be a lot more reassured.
And I'm not being political about this issue, but it does concern me that we're spending so much time in terms of producing a climate change legislation. I mean, the focus of both these bills, in all honesty, even though it's across all sectors, has been agriculture because of the importance of agriculture and its industry here in the north. But things that we have no influence over could actually be more devastating to the agricultural industry than anything that we would do here in terms of climate change. So, I'm just trying to square that circle or see if there is anything or potential. I mean, obviously there's COP26, so internationally there you would like to think that there will be targets set down that nations right across will abide by. But it is a concern for me that regardless of what we do here in the north, to try and accommodate agriculture in a climate change environment, that your industry will actually be biggerly impacted by trade policy as a result of Brexit. But sorry, I initially mentioned that in terms of Mike, just because he had used the phrase a couple of times about being pulled in different directions by customers. So I was hoping he maybe could elaborate just kind of a wee bit more what he meant by that, and what if possible we could do in the bill to ensure that wasn't the case.
Yeah, well, what's happening at the moment, Philip, is that customers obviously are taking quite a bit of interest in what, so they're asking for, at the minute, what they're asking for is evidence of what is being done. So what are milk pools doing to mitigate their emissions, to reduce their carbon footprints? At the minute, they're not saying we want you to produce milk with X amount of carbon per litre of milk, but they're just looking now for the evidence. And you'll have seen that various companies now are gone off and they have done the work to sample a number of their suppliers. And that it really is to be able to provide reassurance to their customers, but equally they're trying to get a competitive advantage. So that's the environment that we're in at the minute, where it's the drivers at the minute are customers and the competitive advantage. But what would help us is if we could get the legislation in place that sets the targets, so that we then have that benchmark that we can say to customers, that's what we're working towards, and there's how we're going to achieve it, and that's what we have achieved so far. That would be a big, big help to us to be able to do that.
I think if I could maybe comment on that as well. I mean, one of the challenges in the market at the minute, as Mike has said, customers are being asked to provide evidence of carbon footprints and reductions. At the minute, there are different ways, different calculators out there that you can use to measure your carbon footprint, and there isn't really, I suppose, a harmonised methodology as yet to do that. And just to give an example, in Europe, they are looking at a product environmental footprint as a way of trying to harmonise the methodology behind that. Now, that would be very much, I suppose, more at a market level. It's not necessarily directly compatible with the national inventory and how it works, which is what obviously the Climate Change Bill legislation is based on. But certainly it would be useful to have some form of harmonised standard there for carbon reporting at farm level and at business level. It's not just an agri issue, you know, it spans all sectors really. It makes sense because we can all be doing carbon footprints to different tools and getting different results, and it's very hard then to compare. But whether it's something that's specifically needed within this particular bill, it might be something at another time in terms of trying to create more of a green market, which is what Europe have done.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, I don't know if you were listening this morning when the Minister was given his, when the Minister was on before the committee, because we veered it towards the subject, obviously, not surprisingly. But he was, you know, very enthusiastic about the possibility of using biomethane from cattle in terms of anaerobic digestion and, you know, creating energy from that source. So, I mean, I'm just kind of asking, is there that same enthusiasm from within the agri industry that this is something that can be expanded upon to really reduce from that source?
If I can jump in there, Philip, actually, if you go onto our website, the Dairy Council website, you'll see a couple of case studies where around that. I mean, there's one, it's a dairy farm up in the Akadui area, and 6 or 7 years ago, they invested in an anaerobic digester. They're milking currently somewhere in the region of about 270 dairy cows. They have a couple of broiler houses that have about 35,000 birds in them. And the waste from those is used to feed the anaerobic digester. The methane from that provides all of the energy usage on the farm, and they are now a net contributor of energy to the national grid. At processing level, we have at Ballyrashane an anaerobic digester. The methane from that is producing 40% of the energy usage within the plant. And we also have dairy companies now that are supplying waste material to Granville in Dungannon. And in fact, Lakeland Dairies at Newtownards bring in the liquefied methane, and again, they use that to power about 40% of their energy usage in that particular plant. It's already happening. That's already happening, and it's very effective. And we're now seeing the move towards moving some vehicles to be powered by methane as well. So you could see a situation where in the future, you know, the output from cattle is not just in that primary productive product, whether it's meat or milk, but that waste could be of value if we can develop this use of AD technology to produce methane that can then feed into the national grid.
So just on that, maybe, Philip, just to add to that, to make you aware, I mean, even within Ulster Farmers Union, I have responsibility for the Rural Enterprise Committee, and we have, and these approaches came to us. We didn't go looking for them, but both Phoenix and indeed Firmus, you know, the gas companies, they are very much in that frame, talking about biomethane and possibilities and opportunities. So it is a discussion that's certainly ongoing in the industry, and when I say industry, I mean the gas industry as well as in the agricultural industry.
Can I just add though that while the technology exists, there's a cost to that, and considerable cost. It's not going to work for every farm. It's probably only for the larger farms. You may be looking at more collective or cooperative type approaches between smaller farms. But the other thing is then you run into hurdles around planning, waste licensing, siting, and so forth. Legislative issues that quite often stall or prevent these types of projects gaining any tract at all. So there's a need for joined up government, I suppose, to ensure that if this is, and I think it is the way forward, it is certainly part of that kind of circular economy that everybody talks about, but there needs to be sort of collective working at a government and a policy level to ensure that those types of positive projects can happen.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if Claire, and I think she's online, but maybe having difficulties with her Wi-Fi. So she has put a question into the WhatsApp. So if I don't see her, and I don't, I'll just ask the question on her behalf. So she has asked if any of the organisations have our suggestions or ideas for policy that needs for transition, to how to accelerate transition. I know those some of you were very keen on the Scottish model for the just transition, but if there are any ideas or suggestions for policies that would help, that you could give us.
Aileen, do you want to maybe on behalf of UFU?
Well, I think, the key thing is what target are we aiming for? Because if we're talking about the target within the private members bill, then it's almost impossible to achieve it without, with the, the Lord Deben has indicated it's unachievable with what we know at the minute. If we're talking about the 82% by 2050, then we're looking at the future agri support, what it can deliver. You're looking at energy policy, you're looking at planning. You're looking at capital grant schemes, and you're looking at long-term research. So it's a high-level question. It's hard to give you, but certainly what we can do tomorrow, we can look at trying to build on the work that's been done to date. And I think all of us around the table were involved in the greenhouse gas partnership. We want to get back around the table and really start that work, actively progressing again, looking at what schemes and measures and research are needed in the short term to start to get those quick wins, because there are things that we can do to do more of and can get that change at a farm level. But I think we'd be keen to do that. The current rural development programme funded a lot of those measures, but it will run out in the next couple of years. So it's really about what replacement will be to allow that knowledge transfer and say future agriculture support and so forth, to allow those sort of positive works that have taken place to date to continue on.
I was going to say, look, I'd agree with that. I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of investments going to be required on farms. If the ambition here has got to be, let's maintain our productive capacity and reduce our emissions in line with the targets in the executive bill. And if we can get there, we'll obviously we want to ensure that we can bring our have a just transition to that, and that means support for farmers to introduce the kind of technologies on farms around. We talked about biomethane, for example. So in that case, it might mean capital grants for those kinds of initiatives on farm. It'll mean support for knowledge transfer. Every farm, as we see it, is going to have to do a carbon footprint. There's going to be a cost to that, and there's going to be a lot of training required. So I think that's how I would certainly see a just transition, and it would mean something entirely different if you were looking at the net zero targets in the other bill.
Okay, thank you. It would be useful just to know your views on duties being put on public bodies as well. Anybody wants, or
I think, Philip, well, I mean, I'll give the rest of them time to think, Philip, while I start here. But I mean, in reality, I suppose this is part of the difficulty we have, and I mean, others have alluded to this, need for joint up government, because sometimes the policies that we see appearing in one sector or in one department are, if not in direct conflict, certainly some elements of conflict. So, I mean, public bodies, in relation to, I mean, I went last night to a meeting with NIA folks and an Anglers Association where there were concerns expressed about pollution, and so forth. I mean, all of these things need joint up thinking. And I think the difficulty at times is that and I'm not pointing at a particular party or politician for that matter, but an awful lot of the thinking appears to be done in silos. And then the communication, when it comes out to maybe the industry or indeed to ourselves, it begs the question, and we've had this in the last few weeks around generational renewal, one of the purposes of the future agricultural policy, and indeed the other aspect coming from planning. So, we have things that are in conflict with each other, and certainly when it comes to working together towards climate change, I know the focus, and ultimately we've come along here, representatives of agriculture with 26-7% of the emissions, but equally, I don't hear that level of conversation. Maybe it's because we were vocal in our responses, but I don't hear that level of conversation from the 23% of emissions from transport and all the other sectors. And I assume that, when it boils down to it, government is going to be working in all of those areas. And I mean, I'll leave it to others there to just come in and comment on the specifics of public bodies, maybe or relevant to their area of expertise or sectors.
I would add, I mean, government's one of the biggest purchasers of food in the economy, and we see ourselves in a journey here, as Micah said, to produce, the capability of verifying that we're producing some of the most sustainable food in the world. And the government, there's a shared ambition there with the government to do that. What better way of demonstrating a commitment to that ambition would there be than, aligning public procurement rules so that, that would favour food from Northern Ireland that was produced, in that way, to an environmental standard. And I think that's something we that's I think as the guys have said at the minute, there's in the commercial world there's lots of different measurement types, there's lots of different standards and whatnot out there, but we could certainly see a situation where that would be government's way of leading the charge down the line when we settle on a single acceptable measure.
I think Conall, just to add to that, what Conall was saying, I think the example, I suppose, that's out there at the minute for consultation around the future food strategy framework for Northern Ireland, I suppose, really sort of sets out, the obligations on different government departments and really putting food at the centre of whether it's health, whether it's food poverty, whether it's some of the things that has been mentioned throughout today. How do you get government more joined up? And I think that is certainly a key issue here, because when you look at COP26 and some of the agenda items that are on each of the days, they all influence with the agri-food industry, whether it's transport, whether it's energy, whether it's land use, whether it's nature. All these things are all sort of focal points for discussion. So there needs to be quite a joined up sort of thinking in terms of making sure whatever we go forward with here doesn't cause perverse outcomes elsewhere for society, in terms of, the health and well-being of society, or indeed the economic health of society. So all of these things would certainly have to come into it. In terms of reporting, I suppose, duties for public bodies, I think, different public bodies, I suppose, will have different requirements in that space. LMC is a public body, but we're such a small organisation, we're probably not going to have much of a need to reporting our carbon targets, for example. But certainly the sector that we work within, is an important sector. But but I think the general sort of thrust of joined up thinking across government is essential, when it comes to this whole agenda.
Yeah, I think just to emphasise, Philip, I don't know. Hopefully, the Minister or DAERA have made representations around what has just recently been launched. That Ian has referenced there, that future Northern Ireland food strategy framework, and I mean the fact that gives us an opportunity in Northern Ireland to look towards local procurement and schools and hospitals and so forth. In a lot of senses, is something that the likes of Conall and our industry has been calling for years, because it moves us away from that cheap. Just go for the cheapest cuts and bring them from wherever is cheapest, and that has been the approach, I guess, around budgets. I understand that aspect of it, but if we're to have a healthy population and produce it environmentally to the standards that we wish to, and then feed our nation with, including Northern Ireland, obviously, with safe, healthy, environmentally produced food, then that future strategy framework is something which is a positive, I suppose, in terms of going forward.
And then probably lastly, and from my point of view, is just the whole issue of the kind of all-Ireland approach. Because it seems hard to understand that there won't be kind of problems if agriculture in the north is working to an 82% target here, and the agriculture industry in the south is working to a net zero by 2050, both in terms of practices, but also like all-Ireland approach. I mean, I mentioned it this morning to the Minister, there will be farmers who have farms straddling the border, but there will also be issues, I suppose, in terms of products travelling up and down, or maybe there isn't. But so in terms of that, is that something that needs to be tightened up in the particularly the second bill, transboundary issues?
Aileen, I'll start. I suppose, look, I was on doing a presentation to the Institute of European Affairs yesterday, and I had my counterpart from IFA on there talking about the fact that, level of emissions in the Republic of Ireland are sitting around 35% from agriculture. So the challenge that exists there is if not greater, indeed, to the one that we are looking at. I suppose there are a number of things, and maybe I'll bring Aileen in just to talk about the differences probably in approach that have been taken. But in reality, I certainly don't think from the, I suppose, the requirements that Lord Debon, and I've alluded to that in the presentation earlier, he is not any way shy in terms of the CCC, the demands and requirements that he's placing on us under, when I say us, I mean the agricultural community and farmers. Many of our farmers, I suspect, when they get to fully understand what those requirements are under the 82% by 2050, will realise that this is no walk in the park. Indeed, it'll be hugely challenging. But Aileen, do you want to just come in maybe on that difference of approach that Charlie McConall and the Irish government have taken all of this?
I think I don't see it. I don't have any real concerns about it, Philip. I mean, we're operating on different rules, at the minute. So, for example, I'm sitting here in County Down, and the close period for slurry spreading in County Louth is different, to here looking across Carlingford Lough. So we're already working on different rules that aim for the same thing. So aiming towards delivering an improvement in the environment, whatever that might be. They're starting, from what I understand, at a worse place than what our industry is here in the north. So there's a bit of catch up to be done in the south. But I think, as long as we're all in a pathway to delivering for climate change, reducing emissions and so forth, at a farm level, our farmers that are working on the border are used to operating different rules. And that's always been the case and different measures. So I don't see any issues at a practical level, but perhaps maybe some of the others can comment at a trade level.
Yeah, I think that, there certainly are areas where an all-island approach is absolutely essential. The obvious one being in research. We have at least two excellent research establishments in the island, Teagasc and AFBI. Look at what the work that our universities are doing north and south. So, we need to foster and encourage that collaboration. And, if research is going to be of value, it needs to have industry input. So, maybe we should be thinking about an all-island research forum where we can bring together the various research institutes and industry at an island level. I mean, I would see no harm in that sort of thing. But I think once you start to go further, it becomes more problematic. So, for example, it's difficult at this point to see that customers, for example, will be saying, we want you to have milk at certain emission level. I don't see that coming down. Now, I may be wrong, but at the moment, I don't see that. And as I said earlier, what we have got to be able to demonstrate is that we are on a journey and we are making progress. But where I see maybe the biggest driver is actually to try and achieve competitive advantage, because this is an area where individual businesses and where countries are now actively working to have competitive advantage. You look at New Zealand, the New Zealand government, in conjunction with industry, are investing huge amounts in this to be able to get the data, to be able to demonstrate what's happening on their farms and in their supply chains so that they can go out and tell the story and get that competitive advantage. You've seen where individual companies are now doing the same to get the competitive advantage. So from an industry point of view, we're going to be obliged to meet whatever legislative requirements you will be putting in place. But equally, we have got to be keeping an eye to what our competition are doing. And now, the likelihood is that those two will not be the same. And we're maybe going to have to do things that will take us beyond the legislation to be able to get the competitive advantage. Just the same as whenever it's aspects of quality. I mean, we go way beyond what the quality standards are to be able to get a competitive advantage. So it's that competitiveness in the marketplace that will be a major driver in the future.
But I just make a point on this as well, and probably agree with all of the above. But just a note of caution as well. You could have the same targets north and south, but the legislation won't be the exact same. So there'll be plenty of nuances within the legislation and within the implementation of legislation that could allow significant differences in outcomes. So, for example, I suppose you'd certainly get the impression from what we read in the last few weeks around, an intention in the south to ensure the stabilisation of the herd from certain quarters, and a special case been made for agriculture at the heart of our society and whatnot. So you could actually have the same targets north and south, but two completely different outcomes for the sector. And there will be, even you have the same targets, you have very different legislation around them, huge impact. So I would certainly not be getting bogged down in that, and I don't think it would have any real implications for trade.
No, just to follow on from that, Conall, and to echo Mike's points, I don't think it will have any impact on trade. I mean, my experience of having worked with various retailers before, for instance, is the fact that they all like to have their own point of difference, and that point of difference will be regardless of what policy is. They're doing it at the minute. They're all setting their own different. Every retailer has its own different climate policy. It has its own different emission targets as to what it wants to meet and what it wants its supply chain to meet. And that will continue because they all want their own competitive edge. And as customers in that market, we'll have to adapt to those different requirements. But that will not have any impact from policy. They'll continue to do that regardless.
Okay, thank you very much. I've none of the other members have indicated they have any more questions, so I think we'll just wrap up at that. So once again, this has been really, really useful, and I appreciate you all giving up your time to come along this afternoon. No doubt, we all kind of want to get to where you have asked us to get to in terms of one bill. So let's hope progress can be made on that. But it'll not be the last time, I'm sure, that we're engaging in a conversation with yourselves and your industry on climate legislation. So once again, just thank you very much and appreciate you coming along. So just in terms of the members then that are still here, I'm not even sure who's still here. I could be talking to myself, not see Rosemary there. So I know I see Harry as well. So is there any other business? Rosemary, you're on silent, so come on. No, you're still on mute, Rosemary. Knock yourself off mute.
Sorry, the problem was I couldn't unmute myself because they had muted me centrally. Philip, just to say, I know maybe it's a bit late in saying it, but Nick told us about the invitation to the Peatlands Park. That's during the break, and some of us would like a day off, and I was hoping to maybe take a day or two during that week, and it just doesn't suit me at all. I don't know, maybe it suits the rest of the committee. It doesn't matter if it doesn't suit me, but it's just a thought.
And to be honest with you, I haven't checked to see if it suits me or not, because I know we've got a recess, but I have stuff on next week. But I do take your point. And Nick, I don't know if it's specifically targeted towards ourselves on the committee or it's targeted towards others and we were just invited to come along. But if it was targeted towards us, is there any possibility that we could go back to them and say that we'd like to do it, but we'd like to do it at another time?
Chair, yeah, certainly no. It was the invite had been proposed specifically for the committee members, and I do take the point that it is during the recess. And I suppose the thought behind that had been rather than displace a committee meeting day, given our forward work programme, that it could potentially be accommodated during the recess week if there were sufficient members and interest to attend. If it doesn't suit, I'm more than happy to go back and seek another date and time to do that. But if there were more than 4 or 5 members who might willing to attend, we might be willing to go ahead on the 28th.
Yeah, no, I'm happy enough for you to go ahead on the 28th, Nick. It just doesn't suit me. I didn't have a break.
I appreciate that.
We trip out on a road trip as a day out, Rosemary. We might even make you tea. Yeah,
it's not even a trip for me. It's in Fermanagh, South Tyrone.
Well, then we'll all go to your house.
Another 50 mile.
So, essentially, Nick, you're just waiting to see what level of success you have in getting members to go along before we make any decision.
That's exactly, Chair, exactly. Just scoping the interest, and then we can firm up there. So maybe it's been a busy old day for everybody. Maybe we touch base on it next week, and see what way folks are teed up for that week.
Grand job.
Chair, I couldn't tell you if we're going to be able to go, and would certainly try. But thank you anyway, and we'll see what the other members do. I'm open to it. Doesn't matter, Happy to go and happy to go again. Thank you.
Okay, so next item is basically date and time of next meeting. So I think it's the same as what I said this morning. So it's the Thursday, 21st of October, 10 a.m. Again, a hybrid meeting. So we'll see you all then, if not beforehand.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much indeed. No, there was a lot of business going through today, so it's very, very much appreciated. Thank you.
I can lie down for a nap now.
Okay, all the best. See you later. Thanks very much indeed. Bye. Bye.